Daniel Cross walked into the dimly lit restaurant on the upper deck of Voronezh Space Station. He had been flying cargo ships for the last 12 hours, and his head was heavy with exhaustion. The air here was warm and filled with strange smells, salient spices, sizzling meats, and the faint scent of ozone from the station's ventilation. Daniel had visited dozens of planets in his life, eaten in every kind of place, from high-end Earth lounges to dirty asteroid canteens. But tonight, he wanted something simple, something familiar, something human. A tall insectoid waiter with glistening black eyes approached his table. "Your order," it asked in a soft, clicking voice. Daniel looked at the alien menu, but the words were all in symbols he couldn't read. So he just leaned back and said, "A rare steak." As close to the human version as you can make it, the waiter tilted its head, its mandibles twitching. "You want it rare?" It repeated, almost like it was testing him. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, rare." The waiter stood still for a moment longer than necessary, then clicked twice and walked away. Daniel didn't notice, but several alien customers at nearby tables glanced his way, whispering in low voices. The lights in the restaurant dimmed slightly. Daniel frowned. Was this some kind of mood setting for evening service? No, it didn't feel like that. There was a tension in the air now. It was as if the whole place had shifted focus, and he was at the center. He glanced toward the kitchen, but instead of hearing cooking sounds, he heard heavy footsteps, too. Large reptilian guards stepped out from behind the curtain that led to the back rooms. Between them was not a plate, not a tray, but a figure. Daniel's heart froze. It was a Gurlan alien girl, young, barely into adulthood by the looks of her. Her skin shimmered faintly under the dim lights, a pale lavender hue with glowing specks along her arms. Her wrists were bound in metal cuffs. A faint scorch mark on her cheek, like she had been struck recently. Her eyes, large and bright, were locked on him, filled with something between fear and desperate hope. The reptilian guards stopped at his table, forcing her to her knees in front of him. Then the insectoid waiter stepped forward with an exaggerated bow. "Your rare steak, sir," it said, its voice thick with something Daniel couldn't place. Mockery, amusement. The entire restaurant was watching now. Some aliens leaned forward in anticipation. Others looked away, as if ashamed to witness it. Daniel stared at the girl, his mind racing. "What the hell is this?" he asked quietly. The waiter's mandibles clicked in a slow rhythm. "Exactly what you ordered. Human," it said. "Rare, fresh, living." The girl flinched at the words, her head dropping lower. Daniel felt a cold anger rising inside. He'd seen slavery before in war zones, in backwater markets, but seeing it presented like a dinner dish was something else entirely. It was a statement, a sick kind of game. They were testing him. Would the human accept what was given, or cause trouble? The reptilian guards grinned, showing rows of sharp teeth. One of them spoke in a deep, rumbling voice. "Go on, take your meal. We made sure she's untouched." Daniel's jaw clenched. Every instinct told him this was wrong. But another voice in his head whispered caution. This was Voronezh Station. Syndicate territory. Cause trouble here, and you might not leave alive. Still, his eyes met hers. She was breathing fast, her shoulders trembling. She tried to speak, but one guard gripped her arm roughly and squeezed until she gasped in pain. Daniel's hand twitched toward the table's edge, where his credit pouch lay. He could walk away, pretend he didn't care, and maybe live another day. Or he could do something stupid, something that might get him killed. The waiter straightened and asked, "Shall I prepare her for you, or will you take her as she is?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "She's not food." The insectoid tilted its head. "Here. She is whatever the paying customer wants her to be." Daniel's gaze shifted to the guards. Then, back to the girl. Her lips moved silently, forming a word, help, before the guard yanked her upright again. The restaurant went quieter. The hum of machinery outside seeming louder than the conversations. Daniel felt the weight of every stare on him. This wasn't just about him and her. This was a public spectacle. And whatever he did next would define how every alien in the room saw the human race. He pushed his chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the floor. The guards tensed. Daniel stood up, one hand slipping into his jacket pocket where he kept a hidden credit stick. The girl's eyes widened. Daniel took a slow breath. Knowing he was about to make a choice that would change the rest of his night, maybe the rest of his life, he looked straight at the waiter and said, "I'll take her." The waiter's mandibles clicked again. "Wise choice," it said. Daniel's. Next words were sharp, "not as food." As a person, the entire room seemed to freeze. Some aliens gasped softly, others murmured angrily. One of the reptilian guards snarled and stepped forward. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. The game had just changed, and he wasn't sure if he could survive the next move. Daniel's words hung in the air like a live wire, "not as food." As a person, the insectoid waiter froze for a second, his glossy eyes reflecting the dim lights. The reptilian guards exchanged a quick glance, their tails twitching in irritation. Around them, the restaurant's customers had gone silent. The only sounds were the hum of the station's life support systems and the distant thrum of cargo haulers docking outside. The taller of the two guards stepped forward, his deep voice dripping with mockery. "You think you can decide what she is?" "She's property," he growled, gripping the chain attached to the alien girl's cuffs. Daniel didn't flinch. "She's breathing. She's alive." "That's not property," he said, his tone calm but dangerous. The girl lifted her head slightly, her glowing lavender eyes darting between the guards and Daniel. Her lips trembled, as if she wanted to speak, but fear locked her voice away. The insectoid waiter leaned in closer to Daniel, its mandibles clicking softly. "This is not a place for moral lessons, human. You ordered rare, you got rare." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What's her name?" he asked. The waiter paused for a fraction of a second. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." Daniel shot back. The guards chuckled.
Ow.
But there was an edge to their laughter and unspoken warning. One of them pushed the girl forward, forcing her to stumble closer to Daniel's table. "Call her whatever you want." "Won't change where she belongs," the shorter guard said, his scaled lip curling into a grin. Daniel leaned forward slightly, speaking low so only the girl could hear. "You have a name?" For a moment, she hesitated, but then, in the faintest whisper, she said, "Leora." The sound of it was like a spark in the cold air. Daniel's hand clenched under the table. He looked back at the guards, his expression unreadable. "All right," he said slowly. "I'll take Leora, and I'll pay for her." Freedom. A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. The insectoid's eyes narrowed. "Freedom is not on the menu," it hissed. Daniel reached into his jacket, pulling out a credit stick and tossing it onto the table with a sharp clink. "That should cover more than your asking price." The reptilian guards stared at the credits, but didn't move to take them. Instead, the taller one stepped closer until his shadow covered Daniel. "You think syndicate property can be bought by some drifter with a handful of credits?" he sneered. Daniel didn't move, his eyes locked on the guards. "I think you don't want to make a scene in front of all these people," he said, his voice low. That was when the taller guard reached out, fast, his clawed hand aiming for Daniel's collar. Daniel reacted on instinct. Grabbing the guard's wrist and twisting hard, the reptilian let out a low snarl of pain, jerking back. The room tensed, every alien inside, watching the dangerous exchange. The shorter guard stepped in, grabbing Leora's arm and yanking her toward the door. She cried out in pain, the sound sharp and panicked. Daniel's chest tightened. "No." he said firmly. Stepping in front of them, the taller guard blocked his way. But Daniel's sudden glare made him hesitate for a fraction of a second. Leora looked up at him again, desperation flooding her eyes. "Please," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the background hum. That one word cut through whatever hesitation Daniel had left. He took a deep breath, then said loud enough for the entire room to hear, "She's leaving with me." The insectoid waiter's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sound that meant frustration or fear. "You're making a mistake," it hissed. Daniel smirked faintly. "I make a lot of those. Somehow, I'm still here." The reptilian guards stepped closer again, their scales glinting under the lights, but this time, Daniel didn't back down. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the rest of his credits, dropping them on the table with a heavy clatter. "That's double the value you think she's worth," he said. "Take it and let us walk out of here." For a moment, no one moved. The tension was like a stretched wire about to snap. The guards stared at him, then at the credits, and then back again. Finally, the shorter guard spat on the floor. "Get out." Before we change our minds, Daniel moved fast, stepping to Leora's side and unhooking the chain from her cuffs. She winced, but didn't resist as he guided her toward the door. The insectoid didn't say a word, just watched them go. Its black eyes unblinking. They stepped into the main corridor of the space station. It was colder here, the air filled with the scent of metal and fuel. Leora stayed close to him, her steps unsteady. Daniel kept his pace steady, but quick. Knowing they couldn't stay exposed for long, "This way," he said, leading her toward the docking bay where his ship was waiting. But before they reached the first corner, Leora stopped suddenly. "They're going to follow us," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You don't understand. They won't let me go." Daniel turned to face her. "I've dealt with worse," he said, his tone calm but firm. But inside, he knew she was right. The syndicate didn't just give up property, especially not in front of witnesses. He glanced over his shoulder and saw two syndicate enforcers stepping out of the restaurant. Scanning the corridor, their eyes locked on him instantly. Daniel swore under his breath. "Move," he said. Taking her hand, they started running. Boots pounding against the metal floor. The shouts of the enforcers echoed behind them, growing louder. Daniel didn't look back again. He knew this wasn't over. Buying her might have gotten them out of the restaurant, but now the hunt had begun. Daniel pulled Leora through the narrow corridor, his boots striking the metal floor with sharp, fast steps behind them. The sound of syndicate enforcers chasing echoed like the pounding of war drums. Leora's breathing was quick, uneven. She was struggling to keep up, her bound wrists making her stumble. Daniel didn't slow, not even when a group of aliens ahead turned to stare at them. Every second wasted meant the syndicate would close the gap. They burst into the station's central promenade, wide open area filled with stalls, food vendors, and shoppers from a dozen worlds. Bright neon signs glowed overhead, advertising everything from exotic fruits to illegal weapons. The sudden noise and crowd made Leora flinch. Daniel spotted a stall selling electronics and darted toward it. He ducked behind the counter, pulling Leora down with him. The alien shopkeeper, a small creature with long whiskers, froze in confusion. "Hide us," Daniel said in a low, urgent voice. The shopkeeper's eyes widened as he spotted the syndicate uniforms moving through the crowd. Without a word, he nodded and pulled a curtain across the counter through a small gap. Daniel saw the enforcers pushing people aside, scanning the promenade. One of them shouted, "Human traitor. Hand over the syndicate's property." The crowd froze for a moment, whispers spreading quickly. Some stepped away, not wanting to get involved. Others watched with a mix of curiosity and fear. The syndicate rarely made public arrests without violence following. Daniel knew hiding would only buy him a few seconds. If they caught him crouched behind a curtain, they'd drag them both away, and this time there would be no polite offer to buy her. He pulled Leora back to her feet. "Stay close," he whispered, before the shopkeeper could protest. Daniel stepped back into the open, his posture tall, his voice steady. The two enforcers spotted him instantly. There. One of them barked. The crowd parted slightly, giving space between Daniel and the syndicate soldiers. Daniel raised his voice so everyone could hear. "She's not your property," he said. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. The taller enforcer sneered, "She's syndicate asset. You're interfering in syndicate business. That means you're signing your death warrant." Daniel smirked faintly. "I've had worse jobs." The enforcers stepped forward, weapons still holstered, but hands hovering over them. The shorter one spoke. "This isn't about you, human. Walk away, and maybe we let you keep breathing." Leora's grip tightened on Daniel's sleeve, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Please. Don't fight them here." Daniel's jaw clenched. If he gave in now, everything he had done in that restaurant would be meaningless. They would take her back, and she would disappear into the syndicate's shadow forever. He took one step forward, putting himself directly between Leora and the guards. "Not happening," he said. The taller enforcer snarled and lunged forward. Reaching for Leora's arm, Daniel moved fast, grabbing the enforcer's wrist and twisting hard. Forcing the alien to drop to one knee with a pained growl, the crowd gasped, some stepping back, others pulling out small devices to record the scene. The shorter enforcer drew his stun baton and swung at Daniel. Daniel ducked low, the weapon passing just inches over his head. With his free hand, he shoved the taller enforcer away, sending him crashing into a vendor's table. Fruit and metal parts scattered across the floor. Leora stumbled back, eyes wide, watching the scene unfold. The shorter enforcer advanced again, baton crackling with blue energy. Daniel sidestepped, grabbed the enforcer's arm, and drove his elbow into the alien's ribs. The enforcer hissed in pain and staggered, but didn't go down. "You're making a very big mistake, human," he spat. Daniel's eyes narrowed, "So I've been told." The taller enforcer got back on his feet, rage twisting his scaled face. Now both came at him together. Daniel shifted into a defensive stance, relying on muscle memory from his soldier. Dazed, the crowd was no longer just watching, they were whispering, some of them actually cheering quietly for the human. To them, this was more than a fight, was defiance against the syndicate's grip on the station. The first enforcer swung his baton again. Daniel blocked with his forearm, pain shooting up his arm, but he didn't stop moving. He kicked the second enforcer hard in the knee, forcing him back a step. Then, in one smooth motion, he grabbed Leora's arm and pulled her into the nearest alleyway. "Move," he barked. They ran, boots hammering against the floor. Weaving between crates and market stalls, shouts followed them. Along with the pounding footsteps of the syndicate soldiers giving chase, the alley twisted and turned, neon lights flickering. Overhead, Daniel spotted a maintenance hatch ahead, its lock panel glowing faintly. He slammed his palm onto the override button. Nothing happened. It sealed. Leora gasped, panic in her voice. Daniel crouched quickly, pulling a small tool from his pocket and jamming it into the panel. Sparks flew, and the lock clicked open. Inside, he ordered. Leora hesitated. "Where does it go?" "Somewhere they can't follow quickly," he replied, pushing the hatch open. They slipped inside just as the syndicate enforcers turned the corner. Daniel pulled the hatch closed behind them, plunging them into darkness. The sound of the enforcers' voices echoed faintly through the metal walls. "We'll find you, human, and when we do, you'll wish you never set foot here." Daniel rested his back against the cold wall, catching his breath. Beside him, Leora's shoulders trembled. You didn't have to do that," she whispered, her voice breaking. Daniel looked at her in the dim light. Yes, I did, he said quietly. Because nobody else was going to. Outside, the syndicate's hunt was far from over. Inside the maintenance tunnels, Daniel knew this was just the first fight, and the next one would be even harder to win. The maintenance tunnel was cold and narrow. Its metal walls damp with condensation from the station's recycling systems. Dim yellow lights flickered overhead. Barely strong enough to show the path ahead, Daniel moved quickly, keeping one hand on the wall to guide himself, the other holding Leora's wrist so she wouldn't fall behind. Her breathing was shaky, but she kept pace, though the sound of her cuff scraping against the tunnel walls made his jaw tighten. Behind them, faint echoes of boots clanged against the metal syndicate enforcers were already inside the tunnels. "They're coming," Leora whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel didn't look back. "Then we just make sure they don't catch us." The tunnel branched ahead into 3 paths. Daniel paused, scanning the small indicator panel on the wall. One path led deeper into the station's service systems, another to storage bays, and the third toward the docking area. He chose the docking route, knowing it was risky. If they could reach his ship, they had a chance. If not, they'd be trapped in a maze of steel corridors. They ran, their footsteps echoing louder now. Steam hissed from broken pipes, and somewhere above, a heavy machine clanked and rumbled. Leora stumbled once, nearly falling. Daniel caught her, steadying her quickly. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, but her eyes darted nervously around. "This place." "I've been here before," she murmured. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer right away, her gaze fixed on the shadows ahead. The tunnel opened into a wider maintenance bay, filled with crates, tool racks, and old machinery. It was quiet too quiet. Daniel slowed, his instincts screaming that they weren't alone. Then he heard a soft, metallic click. The sound of a weapon being readied. Before he could react, a voice rang out from behind the crates, "Drop her, human." Now, 3 syndicate soldiers stepped into view, their armor black and marked with the syndicate's red sigil. Blasters aimed directly at Daniel and Leora. Daniel's eyes darted around the room, looking for cover. "Not happening," he said flatly. One of the soldiers smirked. "You're surrounded. You've got no place to run." Leora stepped forward slightly, surprising Daniel. Her voice was shaky but firm. "If you kill him, you'll never get what you want." The soldiers froze for a moment, their eyes narrowing. Daniel looked at her in confusion. "What are you talking about?" he asked. She met his gaze briefly, and in that moment, he saw something she had been hiding. "I'm not just a slave," she said softly. "I'm the daughter of the High Regent of Alara." The words hit him like a punch. The syndicate soldiers exchanged quick glances. The smirk faded from their leader's face, replaced by something colder. "You shouldn't have told him that," the leader growled. Daniel's mind raced. If she was telling the truth, then taking her wasn't just rebellion against the syndicate. It was political theft, a spark that could start an interstellar war. One soldier stepped forward, reaching for Leora. Daniel moved before he could touch her, grabbing a wrench from a nearby tool rack and swinging it hard. The soldier staggered back with a grunt. His blaster clattering to the floor, Daniel kicked it away, then dove behind a crate as the other 2 opened fire. Blaster bolts sizzled through the air, burning holes into the metal walls. "Go!" Daniel shouted to Leora, pointing toward the far door. She hesitated for only a second before sprinting toward it, her chains clinking as she ran. Daniel grabbed a loose pipe from the floor and hurled it at one of the shooters. It hit the alien's arm, making his shot go wide. Daniel used the moment to dash toward the exit. The syndicate soldiers shouted after them, but Daniel slammed the door panel, locking it from the outside. He and Leora took off again through the connecting tunnel. "Why? Didn't you tell me before?" Daniel asked as they ran. Because anyone who knows is a target, she replied breathlessly. Daniel understood now why they had presented her like a rare meal. It wasn't just cruelty. It was humiliation. They wanted her to be seen as nothing, so her value as a bargaining chip would stay hidden. The tunnel shook suddenly, a deep vibration that made the lights flicker. They're trying to seal the docking area, Daniel realized. He pushed harder, leading her through a final turn before the tunnel opened into the docking bay access hall beyond the security glass. Daniel could see his ship, the Iron Sparrow, waiting silently on the other side. Relief flickered in his chest. They were close. But between them and the ship stood for more syndicate guards, and this time, they were ready, weapons raised. One of them grinned. End of the line. Human? Daniel exhaled slowly, his eyes scanning the area for anything that could turn the fight in his favor. A fuel line snaked along the wall above the guards. If he could rupture it, create a distraction. Maybe they could slip past. He leaned toward Leora, speaking in a low voice. When I say run, you run to the ship and don't stop. Her eyes widened. What about you? I'll be right behind you, he promised, though he wasn't entirely sure. Daniel stepped forward, hands raised as if to surrender. The guards moved closer, confident in their control. Then, in one swift motion, Daniel grabbed a loose tool from the floor and hurled it at the fuel line. The metal struck hard, sparks flew as the pipe ruptured, spraying a fine mist into the air. The guards shouted in alarm, momentarily distracted. Run! Daniel barked. Leora darted forward, sprinting toward the ship. Daniel followed, weaving past the guards as they scrambled to react. One of them fired, the shot grazing his arm, but he didn't slow down. The ship's ramp was lowering its engines. Beginning to hum, they dove inside, Daniel slamming the controls to close the hatch. Outside, Syndicate soldiers pounded on the hull, shouting threats. Daniel turned to Leora. Strap in, he said. Moving to the cockpit, they weren't safe yet, but they were closer than they had been all night. The Iron Sparrow's engines purred low, ready for takeoff. But when Daniel checked the main console, his heart sank. A red warning icon blinked on the display. Docking bay lock engaged. The Syndicate had sealed the bay doors, trapping them inside the station. Leora sat in the co-pilot seat, her hands trembling as she stared at the display. They've locked us in, she said quietly. Daniel nodded grimly. Yeah. And they're not planning to unlock it unless it's to drag us outside the ship. Syndicate guards had pulled back from the ramp, but Daniel could see their silhouettes moving in the shadows. They were setting up heavier weapons, probably enough to punch through the Sparrow's hull. He had minutes at best. Daniel quickly tapped into the station's comm network, searching for any unsecured channels. Most were encrypted. But one voice crackled through, a familiar voice he hadn't heard in years. Well, if it isn't Danny Cross. The voice drawled. Daniel's stomach tightened. Varric. He said flatly. Varric was a smuggler, an old business partner from Daniel's soldier days of. You counted stealing military supplies as business. They hadn't parted on good terms. In fact, the last time they'd met, Daniel had left him stranded on a mining moon after a botched job. Word is, Varric continued, you've made the Syndicate very angry. Can't imagine why. Daniel cut straight to the point. I need the bay doors open. Varric chuckled. And why would I do that for you? Last I remember, you left me to rot. Daniel clenched his jaw. You still breathing, aren't you? That means you got off that rock just fine. After 3 months, Varric replied dryly. Daniel ignored the jab. I don't have time for games, Varric. The Syndicate's about to burn a hole through my ship. Silence for a moment, then Varric said, All right, Danny boy, I'll open your doors. But I want something in return. Daniel already knew it wouldn't be cheap. What's the price? You've got a passenger, Varric said casually. The one the syndicate wants so bad. Hand her over to me instead. I'll get my payout. You get to live. Leora's head snapped toward Daniel. Eyes wide, her voice was sharp. No, Daniel didn't even look at her. His eyes stayed on the console. That's not happening, he said. Then you're dead in 5 minutes, Vorik replied. His tone still smooth, but colder now. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low and steady. Vorik. I'm not making a deal that leaves her in a cage. There was another pause on the comm when Vorik spoke again. His tone had changed more, calculating. You care about her, don't you? Daniel didn't answer. I can hear it in your voice. Vorik went on, all right, different deal. You owe me. Daniel, big time. You'll run a job for me dangerous, dirty, and it's not optional. In exchange, I get you out of that bay right now. Daniel hated it. Working with Vorik again meant stepping into a world of trouble, but there was no time. To argue, the syndicate outside was moving a heavy blaster cannon into position. Fine, Daniel said. You have a deal. Just open the doors. Pleasure doing business, Vorik said with a grin in his voice. The comm clicked off. A moment later, the docking bay alarms blared and the massive outer doors began to slide open. Cold vacuum winds swept into the bay, rattling the Sparrow's hull outside. The syndicate guards scrambled, some trying to stop the doors, others retreating from the sudden exposure. Daniel powered up the main thrusters. Leora gripped the seat's armrests. Are you sure about this? She asked. No, Daniel admitted, but it's the only way we live long enough to regret it. The Sparrow lifted off the pad, its landing struts retracting as the bay's magnetic shield shimmered. Syndicate blaster fire streaked past the cockpit. A few shots slamming into the ship's shields. Daniel banked hard. Shooting through the opening doors just before they sealed shut again, the station fell away behind them, its lights twinkling against the black void, but their trouble wasn't. Over 3 syndicate fighters broke off from the station and moved to intercept. Daniel checked the weapon systems. Only one turret was operational. He hadn't exactly been expecting a dogfight tonight. He looked at Leora, ever fired a ship's gun before. She hesitated, then nodded once. My father. Made sure I knew how to defend myself. She slid into the gunner's seat, hands moving quickly over the controls. The first fighter swept in from the left, its cannons blazing. Leora fired back, her shots cutting across space and clipping the fighter's wing. It spun out briefly before recovering. Daniel kept the Sparrow weaving between incoming fire. You're good, he called over his shoulder. Leora didn't look up, her voice focused. I told you I'm not helpless. 2 more fighters closed in. Daniel pushed the Sparrow's engines to full burn, aiming for the asteroid belt nearby. If they could reach it, they could lose the fighters in the rocks. But the strain on the engines was already pushing the limits. Warning lights flashed on the console. They're overheating, Daniel muttered. We don't stop, Leora replied firmly. If we stop, we die. The Sparrow dove into the edge of the asteroid field. Rocks tumbling past at dangerous speeds, the syndicate fighters followed. But their formation broke apart as they tried to avoid collisions. Leora caught one off guard. Her shot punching through its hull fire erupted as the ship spun away into the dark. That's one, she said sharply. Daniel grinned, despite himself. Let's make it 3. The chase twisted between spinning asteroids. One fighter clipped a rock and exploded in a burst of light. The last turned back toward the station, unwilling to push further into the deadly field. Silence settled in the cockpit except for the hum of the Sparrow systems. Daniel exhaled. We're clear. For now, Leora looked at him, her voice softer now. You didn't have to make that deal with your friend. Daniel glanced at her. You're worth it. She didn't answer, but her eyes said more than words could. Far behind them, the syndicate station glowed faintly in the void. Ahead, Daniel knew Vorik would be waiting and his price would be steep. The asteroid field stretched like a dark ocean of drifting stone and silent danger. Daniel kept the Iron Sparrow low and weaving, letting the shadows of giant rocks hide their heat signature. Every flicker on the sensors made him tense. Half expecting another Syndicate fighter to appear from the black, Leora sat at the gunner station. Scanning the surroundings, her fingers tapped the console nervously. But her voice stayed calm. "They won't give up that easily," she said. Daniel nodded. "No, they won't. Which is why we're going to make them think we vanished." He shut down non-essential systems, letting the ship drift between two massive asteroids. The Sparrow floated in the void, wrapped in silence. Leora's eyes darted to him. "And if they find us?" Daniel smirked faintly. "Then we shoot first." For several minutes, nothing happened. The darkness felt heavier out here, with only the faint glow of distant stars. Leora leaned back slightly, the tension in her shoulders easing just a little. That was when the CUM unit crackled to life. "Danny boy." Varric's voice oozed through the speakers. "I see you made it out in one piece." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "You didn't say your job involved the Syndicate chasing me across half the sector." Varric chuckled. "If I told you everything, you'd never take the deal." "What's the job?" Daniel asked flatly. There was a pause. Then Varric said, "Simple. There's a cargo transport leaving Vorga Station in 2 hours. I need you to intercept it. Bring me what's inside." Daniel leaned forward, suspicion in his voice. "And what's inside?" Varric's tone turned smug. "Let's just say, it's something worth a war." Leora stiffened in her seat. She didn't speak. But Daniel noticed her grip tighten on the armrest. He frowned. "You're not telling me it's weapons, are you?" Varric gave a low laugh. "Weapons, information. People, it's all the same if it buys power." Daniel glanced at Leora, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes avoiding his. "Why do I feel like you know exactly what's in that transport?" Daniel asked her. She hesitated, then said softly, "Because I do. And it's not weapons. It's a Valara data core." Daniel's eyebrows rose. "Your people's." She nodded. "It holds the names and locations of every royal family member, including me." Daniel's stomach sank. If the Syndicate got that, they could hunt down every one of her family and use them as bargaining chips. And Varric wants it. Daniel said slowly. Leora looked at him. "If you give it to him, you might as well hand it to the Syndicate yourself. He'll sell it to the highest bidder." The CUM unit buzzed again. "Well," Varric asked, "are you in, or do I tell the Syndicate where to find you?" Daniel shut off the CUM with a sharp flick of his hand. He stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the low hum of the ship. Finally, he looked at Leora. "We're going after that transport. But we're not giving Varric the core." She blinked in surprise. "Then why?" "Because if we have it," Daniel said, "we can make sure no one else gets it." They powered up the Sparrow again, slipping out of the asteroid field like a shadow. Vorga Station was 2 systems away, but Daniel pushed the engines hard. The stars stretched into long white lines as they jumped to faster-than-light travel. When they dropped back into normal space, the massive bulk of Vorga Station filled the view. Dozens of cargo ships moved in and out, their navigation lights blinking like fireflies. Daniel spotted the Targetan armored transport with Syndicate markings, guarded by 2 fighter escorts. "This won't be easy," he muttered. Leora's voice was steady. "Then we don't give them time to react. Daniel." Cut the Sparrow's lights and drifted into the shadow of a fuel hauler. Using it as cover, when the transport broke away from the station, Daniel moved fast. Engines roaring to life. The escorts reacted instantly, banking toward them. "Here we go," Daniel said. Gripping the controls, Leora swung the ship's turret toward the first fighter, firing a burst that lit up the black void. The shot clipped its wing, sending it spinning into the transport side. The second fighter swooped in, its cannons blazing. Daniel rolled the Sparrow hard, the blasts passing. Just meters away, he closed the distance to the transport, locking onto its docking ring. "You're insane." Leora shouted over the alarms. "Been told that before," Daniel replied. Slamming the Sparrow against the transport side, the docking clamps engaged with a metallic thud. Daniel grabbed his blaster from the storage rack. "Stay here," he told Leora, "and keep the Sparrow ready to break away." He cycled the airlock and stepped into the transport's dim corridor. The smell of oil and ozone filled the air. 2 Syndicate crew members appeared, weapons ready. Daniel fired first, his shots dropping them before they could even aim. He moved fast toward the secure storage bay, the floor vibrating under his boots. When he reached the heavy door, he used an override spike to force it open. Inside, a single black case sat on a pedestal, glowing with faint blue light. The Velura royal crest was etched on its surface. Daniel grabbed it and ran back to the airlock, alarms blaring now. The moment he stepped back into the Sparrow, Leora was already in the pilot's seat. She took one look at the case and nodded. "Strap in," she said. The Sparrow broke away from the transport just as its remaining fighter gave chase. The black of space lit up with blaster fire. Daniel manned the turret this time, scoring a hit that tore through the fighter's engines. It exploded in a silent bloom of fire, drifting lifeless into the void as they cleared the area. Daniel looked at Leora. She met his gaze and said quietly, "You just made yourself the Syndicate's #1 enemy." Daniel smiled faintly. "Guess I've always liked being at the top of someone's list," but inside, he knew this wasn't. Vorik would want his prize. The Syndicate would be furious. And Leora's secret was now even more dangerous than before. Asterisk. The Iron Sparrow drifted in the quiet dark, its engines cooled to a soft hum far behind them. The chaos of Vorga Station and the Syndicate transport was now just a memory, one that would follow them both for a long time. Daniel sat in the pilot's seat, staring at the black case resting between them. The Velura crest glowed faintly under the dim cockpit lights. Leora sat across from him, her gaze fixed on it. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap. They hadn't spoken much since the escape. The tension in the air was heavy, not from fear, but from the weight of what they now carried. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "So, what do we do with it?" Leora's voice was calm but firm. "We take it to Velara." "To my people," Daniel raised an eyebrow, "and the second the Syndicate hears about that, they'll be waiting for us halfway there." "They already know we have it," she said, her eyes meeting his. "The only way to end this is to make sure it's somewhere they can't touch it." Daniel leaned back in his chair, thinking it over. The logical choice was to ditch the core somewhere no one could find and erase the problem before it could get worse. But the look in Leora's eyes told him she wasn't just thinking about herself, her family, her people. The entire Velara royal line could be at risk if the core fell into the wrong hands. Before he could answer, the comm unit came alive with a sharp buzz. Varric's voice slithered through. "Danny boy." "I know you've got it," he said, his tone full of false cheer. "And I know you're not planning to bring it to me." "That's disappointing." Daniel didn't reply. Varric's voice hardened. "You made a deal. You owe me. I'll give you one last chance to deliver the core, or I let the Syndicate know exactly where you are." Daniel reached for the comm controls, but Leora placed her hand on his arm. Her voice was steady. "Put it on speaker." He hesitated, then switched it over. "This is Leora of Velara," she said clearly, her tone cold. "Tell the Syndicate you have me, and I promise you, Varric won't live to spend whatever they pay you." There was a pause on the line. Then a low chuckle. "I like her," Vorik said. "She's got teeth." "Shame you're making enemies you can't afford." "Human?" The comm clicked off. Leaving only the low hum of the ship, Daniel turned to Leora. You realize that just painted a bigger target on your back. She shrugged lightly. It was already there. He exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. All right. We take it to Valera, but we do it my way. Leora tilted her head. Your way? Daniel nodded. We won't fly straight there. Too predictable. We'll cut through the outer drift, hit 3 dead sectors, and slip in through the Erevan gate. Her lips curved into a faint smile. You've done this before. Smuggling. Dodging syndicate death squads. Yeah, he said, with a hint of dry humor, more times than I'd like to remember. The next 2 days passed in tense quiet, every time the sensors pinged. Daniel's hand hovered over the weapon's controls. Twice, they picked up unknown contacts trailing them. But both times, he managed to lose them in asteroid clouds or nebula shadows. On the 3rd day, the blue-green curve of Valera appeared ahead. Its twin moons hung like silver coins in the black sky. Leora leaned forward, her eyes brightening for the first time since he'd met her. It's home, she whispered, almost to herself, as they descended through the atmosphere. Sunlight spilled across endless oceans and sprawling silver cities that glimmered like jewels. Valara's capital rose from the coast in towers of crystal and steel, their shapes twisting upward like living art. Daniel had seen a lot of worlds, but this one was different. It felt alive. The landing bay assigned to them was guarded by tall figures in ceremonial armor. The moment the Sparrow touched down, a group of Velara soldiers approached. One stepped forward, a tall man with the same lavender hue as Leora. His voice deep and formal. Princess Leora, he said, bowing slightly. We thought you were lost. Leora stepped down from the ramp, her posture regal now. Even with the faint bruises on her face and the marks of her chains, I was. Until this human pulled me from the Syndicate's hands, she said, her voice carrying across the bay. The soldier's eyes shifted to Daniel. Measuring him silently, he gave a small nod. Not quite comfortable with the attention, to attendants. Took the black case from the ship, carrying it toward the palace gates. Daniel watched them go, feeling a strange sense of relief and loss at the same time. The weight of the core was no longer his problem, but handing it over also meant his. Time here was ending. Leora turned to him. You could stay, she said softly. There's a place for you here. My father will reward you. Daniel shook his head. I didn't do it for a reward, he said. Her eyes searched his for a moment. Then she smiled faintly. I know. They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the city carrying faintly. In the warm breeze, finally, Daniel stepped back toward the ramp. Take care of yourself, Leora, he said. You too, Daniel Cross, she replied, her voice holding something unspoken as the Iron Sparrow lifted from Valara's landing. Bay. Daniel glanced once at the city below, somehow. He knew this wasn't the last time their paths would cross, far out in the void. Enemies were already moving against them, and somewhere, Varric's voice would be waiting on a come. Ready to collect on the deal Daniel had no intention of keeping. 4. Now, the stars stretched ahead cold, endless, and full of trouble. Exactly the way Daniel liked them.